Let's start off by talking about how Nigeria has been dubbed the generator nation, and the fact that Nigeria is the largest importer of generators on the global level. It just really shows the fact that the economy is growing so extensively, but there isn't enough power to support the growth.
That actually has been the problem. I was actually reading a research report a couple of days ago that said that the Nigerian generator business in itself generates up to 1,000 megawatts daily to supplement the poor power supply situation. And I think that it's a challenge that successive governments have made efforts to try and solve, and they have failed at it. The reality is that the Nigerian manufacturing sector is the worst affected of all the sectors in the country, because manufacturing costs just triples as a result of this poor power situation.
Well, Femi, what kind of solutions can we put on the table here? We keep hearing about the private sector getting quite involved in power generation. It's all about infrastructure spend as well. You know, we here in South Africa, you know, we're also experiencing very similar problems as well. But it is about sustainable energy going forward. What has been tabled thus far?
I think, the issues with Nigeria, and, you know, there's always this lip service being paid to some form of private sector initiative in the power sector. I think that there are two major problems that government has to fix. First is that the ability of the private sector to recover its investment is significantly hampered unless you completely deregulate the power sector. In addition to that, government still has full responsibility for transmission and distribution, which I think is also a major problem in Nigeria. We do have opportunities for alternative sources. There are windmills being planned for the northern part of the country, and there are possibilities that even solar systems can work in those parts. But the truth is that unless investors are able to recover their investment through some market-determined pricing, Nigeria will continue to struggle with private sector investment. Yeah. The federal government itself has spent quite significant sums in the last 5-10 years. A lot of that, it appears, has gone down the drains. We're only hoping that the NIPPs that were planned to come on stream in 2009 will start to come on stream towards the latter part of this year.
Well, Femi, looking at the dormant coal mines that are in Nigeria, I mean, there is a lot of resources in Nigeria for power generation. Of course, coal is viewed one of those dirty elements. Nevertheless, we also know that oil is very strategic as well. Gas is also very strategic. What role do you see these commodities playing going forward? I mean, clearly the oil market is very important right now because it's fueling the generators.
You know, amazingly, Nigeria is probably one of the very few countries that could easily generate enough power to power the whole of Africa, given the resources that the country possesses. The coal deposits in the Enugu area of Nigeria apparently is enough to power 6,000 or 60,000 megawatts of power over a 100-year period. The reality is that government needs to encourage investment into these sectors and ensure that investors are able to recover their monies. The sort of protections that are required from an investment point of view as well is quite important. No one wants to invest where the legal structure isn't particularly clear. We've only had one private sector intervention in the power sector, and that has been bedeviled by all sorts of challenges. So it's obvious that there needs to be some holistic solution that takes into consideration the opportunities of bringing in the private sector and ensuring that in the long term, Nigeria is able to continue to generate electricity appropriately.
Well, turning our attention to East Africa, because there's potentially big oil finds in Uganda and, of course, in Kenya as well. They're talking about gas and oil and all these wonderful commodities as well. You know, the Lake of Turkana in the west of Kenya as well. How do you see the picture changing in East Africa, and how do you see the West and East perhaps being relatively integrated in energy generation?
Without a doubt, that's actually something that's very important. You know, if you look at what has happened with the East African pool, the power pool, there is actually a lot of a lot of investment that can continue to go into the Eastern African region. There are lots of hydro sources that can be mined to generate power in East Africa. And then you also alluded to the fact that there's some interesting gas and oil finds in Uganda, to some extent Sudan and Kenya. I think that those markets can actually very quickly ramp up on power generation. A lot of it has to do with integration. I think that African governments should speak more to each other. I think from an economic point of view, there should be a lot more integration, especially from a power perspective. And what we can then do is to create a significant pool of power, which can then be distributed to markets that don't have either hydro or natural gas powered plants. That is something that Africa has to do, and I think that ultimately we could see some form of integration between East and West Africa. The ultimate test actually for us is the West African gas pipeline, for example, that's currently being constructed from Nigeria to Senegal. I think that initiatives like that have to happen in East Africa as well. And ultimately, we can't solve the power problem for Africa.
Well, Femi, you know, let's look at the economic impact that it's had, because obviously there's been a massive impact to the growth prospects for the region. And I would also like you to touch on hydropower a little bit more, because the question is, have we really tapped into the maximum potential, you know, for the likes of the Congo River as well? And I think we also have to appreciate that Africa has a renewable resource that is constantly there, and it's the sun, and we really need to tap into these investments. And yes, maybe initially it's going to be far more expensive than using oil and coal and all these other resources, but it is sustainable and it's better for the environment.
Well, you know, the true issue here is this. I think that for Africa to continue to grow, let me just put some statistics into this. It's obvious that from a generation point of view, Africa is only able to generate about 20 to 30% of the power that it requires to sustain the kind of growth that we've seen. And when you realize that we're using perhaps the most expensive power in the world to power the growth that Africa has had up until now, it means that the opportunities for Africa going forward are significant. Now, what that means for us is that renewable sources are also quite important with the way, I mean, the world, everyone in the world is actually concerned about the environment. We've got the sun in abundance. We've got water resources in abundance. Places like the Congo River hold significant opportunities for Africa. I think what is required is some concerted effort towards driving investment into these directions. So there's a lot of work from the ADB, you know, the African Finance Corporation, the World Bank. Everyone who's supposed to, I mean, work towards the development of Africa needs to realize that, look, fixing power fixes a significant problem for Africa. It ensures that we keep all the artisans working. The long term for us is to ensure that we are doing this in a sustainable way without significantly damaging the environment. And the sources that we can look for, obviously, are your hydro plants, to some extent your solar plants, which in the initial stage, as you mentioned, could be expensive, but in the long term, it ensures that we're doing this in a very earth-friendly way.